Cliff Maloney, PA Chase, thank you for joining us. You got the hat going on, instantly recognizably Pennsylvania. And let me start out by saying congratulations.
Birds 10 in a row. Is that what we're talking about?
Yes.
Birds are looking real strong.
Real strong. And you're looking real strong, too. Obviously, Pennsylvania, big deal in this election. You guys pulled it out. Your knuckles must be bleeding from all the door knocking. Just get us up to speed real quick on how you felt election night, going from, toss-up status to leaning red to the big victory, and then how that's powering you through into a fresh new year.
I think we're all running on adrenaline right now. We're enjoying the high of the win. But look, we set out with two goals at PA Chase. One, we wanted to knock 500,000 doors. But two, the measurable objective we wanted was to have Trump go from 20% of the mail-in vote, which Republicans have averaged in Pennsylvania, to 33%. And so the stress and the anxiety was about that 33% number. Because we knew if we hit that, we would flip the state. And we were confident if we hit that McCormick would also be able to win in all the other statewide. So going through the process, we were pretty confident we get to 500,000. We ended up knocking 510,000 doors. But like I said, I mean, when you're looking at, some of the pundits on the left, are saying the Trump ground game doesn't exist. These organizations like Turning Point and our group, Citizens Alliance with the PHAs, they don't exist. They're not funded. They're not real. It's just a lot of noise. Right, and it gets to a point where it's like, okay, I have 120 full-time people that have been on the ground in Pennsylvania September 1 through Election Day. I know they're real. I'm watching the daily reports come in, but we ended up finishing with 34.5% of the mail-in vote. Huge win, and we were blessed that it was the state that ended up being the one that got to 270 to deliver the White House.
I remember on election night, of course, we were all hunkered down at Blaze HQ covering the play-by-play. There was this moment where Elon Musk said, and then soon thereafter posted, Donald has won, game, set, match, and he just exited the premises and went on to the next step. Was there a moment for you when you were sort of like, we got it, before anything was reported, before word started to spread?
So I was doing the Charlie Kirk show, his live stream on election night. Charlie called me a couple hours beforehand, and he was like, I need you to come on, because if North Carolina and Georgia are called, it's going to come down to Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
And so we, about 90 minutes beforehand, when Allegheny County was fully in, and we were just waiting on Philadelphia County and some of the collar counties, we really felt like, based on our projections, that we had it. And here's what's awesome. When you run a statewide effort and you're collecting all this data, you're not relying on the Secretary of State. You're not relying on media pundits who are just, regurgitating talking points about, the Kornackis at the big board, right?
Sure.
No, we actually have the data of what we see as kind of in the field polling to know what we're expecting. So about 90 minutes out, when Allegheny County had shifted, dramatically from 2020, and not just Trump's vote doing better, but her vote and her enthusiasm just completely dropping.
That's right.
I'm texting Charlie. I'm like, Charlie, we got to call it. Charlie said, no, I'm getting flashbacks to 2020, PTSD. He didn't want to call it. But I was on page with Elon, and that we kind of could see the numbers, and she underperformed so strongly that there was no path for her.
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit more about Pennsylvania, the state, in depth. It's the Keystone State, obviously. Arizona, Pennsylvania both played such an important part of not just the election, but kind of like the mind game around the election. Like, there's a lot of talk about that, exactly what you said, Republicans not having that ground game. Maybe, people who are sitting at home saying Trump is awesome, but how do you get them to actually motivate? Are we going to get crushed on ballot harvesting? All that stuff. And between Arizona and Pennsylvania, and you and Charlie really just sort of creating a trustable impression that, like, no, actually, we kind of do got this. We do have people. They're real. They're flesh and blood. They're down there doing things that are going to be able to ultimately outpace the ground game on the left. But when you look at Pennsylvania, this is a state that for whatever reason, and it's probably a pretty long list at this point, has come to represent in Americans' minds not so much like the sunny optimism and explosive growth of a state like California, or like sort of Elon Musk in tech world, like, we're going to Mars, you can just do things, we're going to blast off into the future, it's going to be amazing. But really just kind of that, that Rust Belt legacy and kind of like, crime and sort of urban problem. Really Pennsylvania representing kind of the America that was. And so I just wonder, like, from your standpoint, especially in your involvement really at the grassroots level, experiencing the state, as a resident, as a as someone who's mobilizing, a community organizer, if you will, someone with that perspective, what's the mood in Pennsylvania right now as a state, as a community of people? And do you think that when MAGA 2.0 talks about that golden age and that kind of American Renaissance, what does that look like on the ground when it comes to a state like Pennsylvania?
We're in the golden age, baby. You're exactly right. I think one thing that we realized, if you look at kind of the vibe on the ground, obviously they got the two blueberries in the tomato soup,
right,
with Pittsburgh and Philadelphia. But we really, really think that a couple things that weren't as publicly shared or that people weren't talking about. I think JD Vance was a tremendous pick for Pennsylvania. Yeah. I think a lot of people talked about it. The left tried to destroy him when he first was chosen. But I think people undervalue how much his upbringing and his blue-collar background, working class, just connects with a lot of the folks across Pennsylvania. The DC elite political consultants dream of creating somebody that has a story like JD Vance. They create that all the time. He's the real deal. And so I told people that, one of the major themes that we found when we were talking to voters is authenticity. People wanted something that was authentic. And I think when you compare JD Vance and Donald Trump with Harris and Walz, it just wasn't even close. And I think alternative media, I think the podcasting world, I think, just people are getting their information from so many different angles, if you will, but they can go through it and figure out what they truly believe. But I think that's led us to this election being more about authenticity than any other election in history. You can't just come out and put out a press release. No, Donald Trump is doing 3 hours on Joe Rogan.
Yep.
Right? I mean, you are as in-depth as you can be. And
nowhere to hide in that format.
And I think Harris was probably the worst person to put up when you're looking for someone that's genuine, that's authentic. I mean, she just really could not put a sentence together where anyone thought, oh, she really believes that.
Right.
And so I think that working class thing, the vibe for me is, yes, this is a new beginning. For those on the right, we've won the battle, but the war has just begun. The policies are we're going to dictate where we go from here. But I just think that the working class really showed up in a way to help. And I'm talking a lot of young men, a lot of black men, the Amish. I mean, there were all these coalitions of people that just came together. And the last one I'll say is Bobby Kennedy. Mm-hmm. I mean, I have a lot of my relatives, pipe fitters, Teamsters, Southeastern Pennsylvania. They vote blue, right?
Yeah.
That's their whole thing. Bobby Kennedy, a lot of them love JFK.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, my late grandmother, if she was still around, loved JFK.
She'd still be voting for JFK.
She might be in Philly, I got to check. But the reality is that Bobby Kennedy, the amount of independence and the health folks that really came into the MAGA movement,
yep.
I just don't think there's ever been a coalition like that before.
No, I don't think so either. And, I think everything you said about JD is absolutely right. But here's the thing about JD that really fascinates me is, his rollout of the Hillbilly Elegy thing. You got the book, it's a bestseller. You got the movie. You got Hollywood saying, like, yes, we're going to do this. And there was that feeling of, there's a couple different phrases that are being sort of tossed around to capture that kind of character that's been created of, like, the guy who presents as like a blue-collar man, but the words that are coming out of his mouth are like not the words that you might associate with the average, right? That sort of like Frankenstein that the left has created. They kind of wanted to do that to JD, and they were happy to say, yes, Hillbilly Elegy, these people are on their way out. It's like a dead-end culture. It's all very sad, but, they're part of the past, and, our little merry band of freaks is the future. But he didn't let that happen. And that twist, I thought, was really remarkable. And when JD's running as a VP, and they start bringing out these old photos of, with the flat iron bangs and the eyeshadow, and I was like, yo, that was a lot of guys.
I got those photos.
Yeah, My Chemical Romance was definitely a thing. And we've had this generational change.
Right. And
we're now stacking young generations of people who are like, yeah, I voted for Trump. Like, why? What else was I going to do?
Right.
It's a no-brainer. And that's like a baseline for them. And I've seen those articles in the New York Times where it's like, we have kids, they don't remember the horrible things that Donald Trump has done. Like, what are we going to do? And that break, that ability to leap out of the kind of cultural framework that was created to house and kind of imprison guys like JD his ability to hop out of that and to go into a direction that, if you're younger than 40, you're going to be like, I know exactly who this guy is, and I like it. And that's just really melted minds on the left, I think.
Yeah, and I think we're just in a completely new world, once again, of this alternative. I say alternative media, but just how people get their information.
Yeah.
Right? My dad was a Trump voter this year because of, literally because of TikTok.
Yeah.
Right? Because he's like, Harris is just like, he's watching these videos, and he's like, and I'm not even on TikTok, right? But I'm just saying that people are getting their content in just such a new way. And I love these long-form sit-downs that JD and Trump did because, you can kind of go deep. You can really dive in and figure out what's going on in their head. Jordan Peterson, when he did like his famous interview with BBC way back when he first got, his rise, he says, yeah, well, you should be digging in to figure out what's going on. That's good. Good, do that. And it's like, if you did that for 10 minutes, Brett Baer with his interview with Kamala Harris probably ended her campaign. There were multiple times, but any time that she would get a serious conversation or have to give a serious answer, I think the American people are just done with kind of this idea of talking points.
Yeah, I think so too. We got all these podcasts, and that's awesome, and I love my podcast bros. But there definitely seems to be a phenomenon here where a lot of Americans are saying, like, okay, we listen to the intellectuals, we listen to the experts, they very thoroughly explained everything to us. Sometimes, I guess they were right because they were educated, but a lot of the time they were not right, and a lot of the time they were willfully wrong, and they were trying to, to mislead us into ruining our own lives. So many people I know in their 40s, in their 30s, in their 20s, in their teens, they miss those 4 years that were taken away from them by the lockdowns. They miss what they felt like was going to be like capstone prime years of their life, coming of age years, the last years of their childhood. We have multi-generations lining up here. And I think like that shift paired with the way that now you got guys who are in their 40s who thought, they were led to believe that at some point over the past 15 years, they might finally get the torch, the baton handed off to them. Now they're finally getting that opportunity. And that kind of energy, that kind of redemption energy is so powerful and it's so spiritual. It's not just about like, now I can finally build wealth, although you can, it's not just about like, finally, maybe I can come out of, my bedroom and step into public life a little bit, although that's part of it too. But it's really just like, I can be useful, like I can matter again. That's so powerful. And, when I look to what you guys are doing and you got your pin on there and 2025 is going to be a new year and you're not going to be in election mode, just talk a little bit about like your team and, what their ambitions are and what lights them up.
Yeah, so number one, we hire based on ideology. I know attorneys tell me to be careful how I say that, but it's the truth. We hire based on people that want to be in the fight, right? Sure. And usually they're younger folks, 18 to 30, 35. But they're patriots. They're people who really care and want to get in the fight. And it's interesting, half of our people probably come from Turning Point. That's a great pipeline for us.
Sure.
But it's really fascinating because you have some people who take a year after college and come, they want to get involved. Some people don't go to college and they say, listen, I want to get in the fight. A lot of people are working a dead-end job. And they're like, listen, I could work 9 to 5, making okay money, or I can go to Pennsylvania and chase ballots to hopefully save the republic, right? And people laugh about that, but you'd be surprised. That's the motivation for a lot of the people that came that worked for us full time. And so they're out there. By the way, a typical week, they work 6 days a week, 10 to 7 every single day. They're knocking doors. They get an hour for lunch. And typically you're hitting about 100 to 125 doors a day. But it's the conversations they have at the door. Yeah, there are certain people that say, get off my lawn and slam their door. But for every one of those bad conversations, you have 4 or 5 really good conversations with people that are excited to vote, that are participating in the mail-in vote process. That's why we're at their door. So I think for them, it's a tough gig, but for years the left has just pushed through it, where the right has made excuses and said, oh, we can't do that, it's too hard. We'll put all our money into mailers, right, or TV.
Sure.
And I think that time is over. I think Charlie has really sprung onto the scene this idea of, no, we have to do the door-to-door work. We have to match the Democrats' tactics and fight fire with fire, and I think that's where we are. But the energy from the door knockers is what keeps me engaged, is what keeps me excited. Hearing the stories of them going, talking to voters. Some people we had to go to their doors 6 or 7 times before we were able to get them to vote.
Are there a few of those stories that really stuck out to you that sort of it just kind of epitomized to you what this election was all about?
There are so many stories where people will send somebody to their door and they will answer and say, I've never had somebody come to my door before.
Oh.
And, the wild thing about the Pennsylvania Chase and what Charlie did in Arizona and Wisconsin and all these other great partner orgs, Scott Presler, America First Works, everybody, Elon Musk, America PAC, can't forget Elon, Patriot.
Sure.
But the wild thing is when you do primaries, okay, we're talking door knocking, I have to go in and say that you're a rhino scumbag and I'm a patriot, you should vote for me, but we're both Republicans. Those are tough doors, not you specifically,
yeah.
but those are tough doors to knock, right? Those conversations are difficult. When you go into a general election, once again, not chasing ballots, but when you're doing door-to-door work in a general election, what happens is you have swing voters and you have moderate Dems that you're trying to convince to support your candidate. Tough, but not as hard as a primary. Chasing ballots, you're going to doors of people who love Donald Trump, who are hardcore Republican. They're Trump supporters, but our job is to make them Trump voters.
Yep.
Right? So a couple of the conversations, you have people that cry at the door, that talk about how this is the end of our country if Trump doesn't win. You just get a lot of emotional stories. But it is baffling to me, and it's kind of disappointing how many Republicans say that we're the first person that's ever knocked on their door. And we're in swing counties, right? It's not like we're up in Bradford County.
Right.
It's not like we're in some of these areas where it doesn't, we're in heavy red areas, but we're also in these competitive areas. But people were just engaged this cycle like they've never been before. I'll share with you the craziest feedback we got. Black men in Philadelphia.
Yeah.
They hate Kamala Harris.
Yeah.
I'm not here to tell you why. I think it's about the economy. You could compare Trump's economy to the Biden-Harris. But we ended
you don't
up...
think it's about the personality kind of thing?
Authenticity? Yeah, it's wild. We literally adjusted our strategy. We had 4 or 5 black guys that were PA chasers knocking doors, and the feedback from black male voters was just off the charts that we actually moved in 20 of our black guys who were knocking to Philadelphia and just said, you're only talking to black men. And I really give them a lot of credit for being able to turn out so many voters for Trump. Harris had record low turnout in Philadelphia County. And I just think, black men were tired of it. And they were all in for Trump. You talk about those 4 years that was, kind of taken from them. I think that community really connected with that message.
Well, and just the relentless cynicism that we got for so many years of no, you're not going to be able to overperform with black males. You're not going to be able to overperform with Latino males, and Trump, just stuck to it. They said that it couldn't be done. I told them, and he was right, and and he wasn't just right because it sounded nice. He was right because of guys like you. So we've got such big things on the horizon. I know you guys are moving, beyond election cycle stuff into judicial and other. There's a lot of low-hanging fruit on the table. Just in closing here, give us one idea of what your juiciest target you think is in 2025.
So there's 9,000 judge of election races in 2025 in Pennsylvania. Every single precinct has one. Going to be making some big announcements in January on that. We're also looking at some school board races. But if folks want to stay looped in, pachase.com. And I'm on X at Maloney. I appreciate you guys, the platform, and getting the truth out there.
Absolutely. We appreciate you too. Have a good one. Enjoy AmFest.
Appreciate it.
Cheers.